Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar series for today on safety leadership. My name is Nalani Jenkins, and I am the COO of Lawson Associates. I'm going to be helping as a moderator and also just managing any technical issues if we have any for Tracy. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you Tracy Lawson. She is the president of Lawson and Associates and the host for today's safety leadership webinar.
All right, there we go. Can everybody see me and hear me? Okay, I just wanted to pop in and say hello. Thank you everybody for joining us. This is part of our safety leadership webinar series, like Nalani said. I'm pleased that everybody could take advantage of this during this time. We'll be doing a free session once a week through the first week of May, and then normally we do one a month after that, and we'll see how that continues. If we're all still home, working from home, we'll add a few more during the week with some new topics. But we're excited you could join us. Really, there's no strings attached. I'm gonna pop my picture off here so you don't have to watch me the whole time. No strings attached. We're just really trying to fulfill what our vision is for our company. Our purpose and goal is to reach every business in the state of Hawaii and make everybody safer and more prosperous. So no catch. We're just committed to starting new conversations about safety and transitioning from traditional programs based on models to system thinking and focusing on something very important to us, which is human capital sustainability, protecting and saving our workforce. So we appreciate you guys joining us today. Like Nalani said, if you haven't noticed yet, there's a chat function and there's a question and answer. Any questions you have for me, if you could just put those in the question and answer, and I'll answer those at the end of the webinar. Chats, if you're having any issues, then Nalani will respond on chat to help try and get you to help you resolve those issues. Just a couple quick things to let you know about. We do have, if you go to our lawsonsafety.com training, we do have some virtual webinars that we're doing. We actually have fall protection coming up, the 24-hour that's based on EM385 and OSHA, some silica, and quite a few other things. This is just a quick screenshot, but if anybody wants to take advantage of this time and do some custom classes, we're open for that too, and you can email me. We also have an e-club. We've been sending out a lot of information about COVID-19. We just recently did 2 free webinars for GCA Hawaii and their membership, the General Contractors Association and their membership about COVID-19 and from an employer's perspective, what can you do? How can we keep our workforce safe and healthy and continue to be considered essential workers so we can keep going forward. So if you're interested, join us, no pressure. All right, so let's get started. So I attended I like to go to, learning sessions and different workshops when I have time. And I had, about a year or so ago, I went to a workshop that was put on by Ahakane on La'au Lapa'au, and that's Hawaiian herbal medicine. And the teacher, Emalani Foley, started off the class here, and this is her picture, with this whiteboard, and she said that there are those of us who are in need of some new truths. And this really got my attention. And I stopped and I looked at it and I just started thinking about work, and I started thinking about trying to get a different way to say our message about safety to management, to workers, to even other safety professionals. And what I've found over time with myself, and I think this applies to other people too, is usually when I go to a class, I listen to confirm what I think I already know, instead of listening to find new truths. And I just want to challenge everybody as we start off today. I know we have a nice variety of managers and safety professionals and employees joining us. I just want to challenge you to put aside for a second what you think you know and what you do know. And I want to challenge you to find something new, find something different, and challenge your pre-existing knowledge. They say for adults, it's harder for us to learn new concepts or think of things in new ways because we have so much experience and so much of our brain space is taken up already with all that knowledge that we've gained. So I want to challenge you to purposefully put aside what you know and look to disprove that as we go through today's class. And I find when I do that, it helps me look at things with an open mind, because really, I'm sure folks have heard the term thinking outside of the box. Really, this is where we find new truths and solutions to our issues or different strategies. And so that's really the benefit, is looking at things in another way and listening for new information. So we hope you join us with that perspective. So I mentioned human capital sustainability in our vision and our goal for our organization, and really one of the reasons why we're doing this. And and then I said safety intelligence is really a baseline for that. So what is safety intelligence? So most of us have heard of the intelligence quotient. Some of you might have taken an IQ test before, and that really measures the degree or amount of intelligence a person is said to have. And depending on what resources you look at, some people even say that we'll learn our whole lives, but some of us, or most of us, we're already born with our cap or our quotient, and we really can't exceed that. I don't know that I believe that, but I guess there's people smarter than me who are determining this, okay? Many of you might have also heard of EQ, or the emotional quotient, or emotional intelligence. There's a great book out there on that. You can take a test, and it really tells you what's your capacity to be aware of, to control, and to express your own emotions, and to handle your interpersonal relationships with empathy and to be able to relate, okay? And it is said that we can change that and grow that, thank goodness, okay? So when we were sitting down brainstorming and thinking, how can we really, where do we want to go? Where do we want to be? What are we trying to accomplish with our company and our work and our profession? We came up with the term safety quotient, or SQ. And we call this safety intelligence. And that's really our capacity to be aware of, or to control or express our commitment and our understanding of safety and the impact on human capital sustainability, the preservation of our people, the preservation of our way of life, right? And then it's also looking at other things that go with that preservation of human capital, which is efficiency and profitability. So SQ is, when we talk about this today, is really our process of integrating a safety management system, not a safety program. There's a difference, okay? The safety management system that integrates safety into the entire workflow of an organization. It embeds into your culture, which is the way that we do our work and the way that we affect each other's behavior. And it definitely embeds into our organizational goals and focuses on our human capital sustainability, our greatest resource, which is our people. So human capital has been defined several times, and it's really a collective of resources possessed by people and groups of people within an organization or a given population. These resources could include somebody's training, their talents, their skills, their abilities, experience, their intelligence. It could include their training, judgment, and wisdom. All these things that this person possesses individually, and then collectively as a group or as a team. And that's a form of wealth that is invaluable to an organization and to a community and even to nations, right? And so maintaining this human capital sustainability from a focus of safety is very appropriate. You think about just our workplace from the time you maybe entered into this industry to today. We've seen a lot of challenges and a lot of change. We have global competition now instead of just community competition. We have new technologies. We have new mergers, acquisitions, more complex companies, rules and regulations. All these things have made it very difficult for companies to be competitive. And it has become even more critical for company executives and managers to take stock of our resources, of our people, in order to find our edge. And we do things like outsourcing for subcontracting and maybe even for employees now. And these have become some solutions, but it's clear that the greatest resource in an organization is our workforce. And so sustaining this human capital, just like we have such a great emphasis and improved awareness in our communities among environmental sustainability, I submit to you even more important is human capital sustainability, being able to protect our people. Okay? So we're going to start off this class with something a little bit different. We're going to do a case study, and we're going to look at 3 different individuals and compare what they have in common in relation to one another and in relation to this safety intelligence approach, this safety management system, this human capital sustainability approach that we're talking about. So the first one is Henry Ford. What do we have in common with Henry Ford? And some of you, I hope, know who Henry Ford is. He's known as the father of the assembly line and definitely Ford Motor Company, right? So when he began making cars in the early 1900s, they were considered state-of-the-art, and his manufacturing process would bring the car body, which was delivered by a horse-drawn carriage. They had teams of workers who assembled the automobiles then on top of sawhorses. And the team would rotate from one station to another, do their part of the work, and then move to the next station. And they each did their piece to bring the vehicle and put it together. Parts deliveries were timed, but often ran late. They had pileups of workers then vying for space, delays in production, and safety issues. So fortunately, that's not how we do things now. And why is that? And that's because he realized this was not effective, this was not safe, and something needed to be done differently. In fact, people back in that time said, anybody who can invent this way to mass produce cars and bring the price down at the same time, we're going to basically go down in history. So Ford had already developed in 1908 the Model T, and this was known as a car for the masses. And he was trying to find a way to make as many of these cars as rapidly and as safely and with high quality as possible. So interestingly, you'd think that he surrounded himself with a bunch of car experts and automobile makers and people from his own industry, but he didn't. He actually surrounded himself with a learning team, and he brought in experts from various fields like the brewing industry and the canning and steelmaking industries. And each of these people contributed their expertise to find a solution for mass manufacturing of automobiles. So his vision and leadership to seek outside the box information, new truths, new ideas, to have a team that could collaborate and learn together was not only innovative in the factory setting, but ultimately led to the development of what we have now as a moving assembly line. So they took where they had 140 assemblers, they were stationed along a 150-foot line, and they installed parts of the chassis as they dragged the chassis across the floor by a winch. This was novel and new. So man hours of final assembly dropped from more than 12 hours with their stationary assembly where workers moved station to station to fewer than 3 where the vehicle chassis moved station to station along this assembly line. So bringing that out, that new mass production was immediately significant to industry. It made cars more accessible to the community. It made it safer for the workers, and it definitely improved efficiencies. In fact, in 1912, Ford Motor Company produced 82,000 Model Ts, and the car sold for about $600. By 1916, 4 years later, after he'd implemented this production assembly line, his production rose to 585,000, and the price dropped to $360. So this was substantial, and this was a huge impact. It's said that Ford's vision for safe and efficient transportation for everybody and putting together these learning teams and his vision and leadership enabled him to create a climate where his team could collaborate and bring forth innovations that basically changed the face of how we look at automobiles today. What a huge impact. So if you look at safety intelligence as it relates to Ford and as it relates to his learning team, what are some of the things that are in common? Well, number one, he utilized third-party experts. He didn't just stick with collaborating with people within his own industry. He went outside the industry, and strategically, he looked for people who had an understanding of manufacturing and maybe produced different parts, but who did things in different ways. And he really focused on the efficiency of the operation, which are all very important elements. And when we talk about efficiency today, for us, that means the safe way, the quality way, and the productive way. I really believe we shouldn't have to choose between production and safety and quality. We should be able to do all of them the same and at the same time. Sorry, I had to cough. Okay, innovative system-based solution. Again, he brought in a learning team to collaborate with new ideas. He improved efficiencies substantially. He went from more than 12 hours under stationary assembly to fewer than 3 hours with his moving assembly system. So effective safety management is a competitive advantage in the business arena. If you haven't seen this already over the past 10 to 15 years as it's been evolving, it's certainly the face of safety and how it's viewed by owners, how it's viewed by contractors and businesses has changed drastically. And using a safety management system to integrate risk control and loss reduction efforts, to proactively put these into our businesses instead of reactively only, can really result in management leadership and commitment, meaningful employee involvement, and effective measures. We're looking for continuous improvement in these areas and with our organizations. And the more we can get people involved in managing this process, the better we'll be. And so it has been recognized across many industries and collaborative teams and innovative teams who create things like the American National Standards Institute and National Safety Council and other groups that look at this safety and try and help change the face of how our industries work. It's been recognized that organizations really need to consider not just whether they have the elements that are required of a safety program, but how these elements interact with each other and impact the system. Systems are dynamic. Management systems are dynamic. Companies are dynamic. They are not linear where we do step by step by step and we're done. One thing affects another, and that could either be positive or desired change or negative undesired change. And that's a huge concept that I want to emphasize for us to focus and study more on and look at more, is the dynamics of a management system. So our next case study after Henry Ford is a gentleman by the name of Paul O'Neill. And when you go to our website that Nalani gave you in the chat room, we have not only the training slides, but there's a chapter of The Power of Habit, the book by Charles Duhigg. Great book. If you like to read, I encourage you to do this, the whole book. But if you only can read a little bit and it's not your favorite thing to do, please at least take the time to read this chapter that they've made available. It's a case study of Paul O'Neill and his incredible business success. You know, we don't have to be the size of Alcoa, who is a worldwide manufacturing company for aluminum, but these concepts can apply to us even in a 1 or 2 person business. So it's an interesting story of Paul O'Neill and his success. And he was the new CEO for Alcoa. They were struggling financially. Safety was terrible across the board in every plant, and they were having big issues. And so Paul O'Neill got selected to be the new CEO. He had a couple months before he was going to start his new job, where he really sat down and thought about how on earth was he going to take Alcoa and turn it around. And so he was a virtual unknown. And if you look at his picture, good guy, but not flashy, just, you know, a regular standard guy, okay? He was a former government bureaucrat, and many people on Wall Street had never even heard of him. For an organization like Alcoa to bring him in was unprecedented. When he was introduced and finally took over and was introduced at the press conference that they held for him, he immediately started off by talking about safety and his intentions to make Alcoa the safest company in America. He intended to go for 0 injuries, and the people in the room were confused. Some of them, the story talks about that they thought this guy was on drugs. He must be some, crazy person, and what on earth has Alcoa done? They ran out of the room and were calling their investors and telling them to sell stock, that this guy was off his rocker. And so he stuck to his guns. He stuck to his commitment and his plan, and he knew something that other people didn't, and that's the power of habit. And so whenever he was asked about how Alcoa was doing, he would always redirect and focus on safety and their success with safety as a key indicator or making progress in changing habits. See, this focusing on safety required the collaborative effort of management and the line worker, which was missing and is a key to success of any goal. So within a year of Paul O'Neill introducing his focus on safety, Alcoa's profits would hit a record high. By the time O'Neill retired in 2000, the company's annual net income was 5 times larger than before he arrived, and its market share had risen by $27 billion. All that growth occurred because at the same time that Alcoa became one of the safest companies in the world, and I would submit because Alcoa focused on becoming one of the safest companies in the world. So before O'Neill had arrived, almost every Alcoa plant had at least 1 accident a week. And once his plan to bring everybody together with a focus of safety was implemented, some facilities would go years without a single employee losing a workday due to an accident. This company's workers' injury rate fell to 1/20th of the US average. That's substantial. O'Neill made one of the largest, stodgiest, and most potentially dangerous companies into a profit machine based on safety. And he did that by attacking one habit and then watching changes ripple throughout the organization. It was simple. He said that you can't order people to change. And boy, do I know that's true. That's not how our brains work. He said he decided he was going to start focusing on one thing, and if he could start disrupting the habits around one thing, he knew it would spread throughout the entire company. He believed that some habits have the power to start a chain reaction, and changing others baits as they move through the organization. Some habits matter more than others in remaking a business and lives, and those he called keystone habits. Things like safety, how people work, how people eat, play, live, spend, and communicate. These all influence our lives. Okay. So the next, we'll talk about the connection here in a second. The next is, and our last of our case studies is Dr. Betty Jenkins, or Auntie Betty, as those who know her call her. This Dr. Jenkins is the mother of Nalani Jenkins, our COO. Dr. Jenkins is the daughter of Elizabeth Ellis. Many may have heard of her. She was an educator and native Hawaiian speaker. She's actually credited with being the teacher for today's leading Hawaiian language professors. Dr. Jenkins is a revered elder, or kupuna. She's a lifetime educator, innovator, cultural practitioner. And again, I mentioned she's the mother of Nalani, who's also a musician and songwriter in her own right, legendary. Dr. Jenkins created the 4 Bs, and this is fundamental in our company, and I think has great impact when you look at our safety community. She first created these 4 Bs to unify her students and create a sense of belonging and value with regards to Hawaiian cultural beliefs within her classroom as a teacher. While this was culturally based on Hawaiian values, this can absolutely span across into the workplace. It can be infused into a safety culture, which is focused on unity of effort, value of life, a sense of belonging to a team, and the thoughts and behaviors that contribute to achieving our goals in a positive way. These 4 Bs have fostered and uplifted the value of individuals, the community to work together and to improve quality of life. As a side note, we're supporting the startup of the nonprofit Be Hawaii, which is based on Dr. Jenkins' 4 Bs in human capital sustainability. And hopefully you'll hear more about that to come in the next few months. We're excited about that. But these four B's are believe in a foundational value, safety, preservation of life, human capital sustainability, behave in a manner which practices those foundational values. Those are the decisions we make every day. Implementing a safety management system and making decisions that are right. Belong to a community that reflects wisdom, aloha, and foundational values. So your community could be your workforce, could be your family, the community you live in. It could be the crew or the job site personnel that you work with. Our community can be formed in a lot of different ways, where you may say, I don't have impact over my whole organization, but you can impact your community of the people that you deal with on a daily basis. And then the last one is become. And really what we're trying to become is become right and balanced and making good decisions that improve our quality and sanctity of life. So what is the connection to safety intelligence? So the connection between Ford, O'Neill, and Dr. Jenkins may not be obvious immediately, but they're all successful in their different industries and different groups and associations, yet they share many of the same concepts that help them achieve their success. Dr. Jenkins, she had culture within the groups. She created the tone and what was acceptable behavior and the way that they did things within her classrooms and within her community associations they work with. She had a process for learning. She had beliefs and values that were shared and embedded in these groups. And there was a definite unity of effort and belonging within her realm of influence. Henry Ford, he had culture. It was based on innovation and efficiency and improving the quality of life for Americans so that we could all afford a Model T. He had learning teams that put together unity of effort to come up with better systems. And he focused on efficiency that included safety and used third-party experts to speak into his group. And then Paul O'Neill definitely had an impact on culture, focusing on safety and keystone habits and process and things that would make a difference and bring together the gap between management and the worker. He focused on processes and unity of effort, efficiency of his team, involvement from his team, and accountability and keystone habits. In fact, Paul O'Neill actually demanded that his managers know more about what was going on with safety than his own safety manager. So anything worth doing takes effort. And a common assumption is that if an organization implements all the pieces of a management system, even if they're in isolation from one another, the result will be a coherent management system based on all the pieces being implemented. So just because I put all the chapters of my policy in place doesn't mean that they're going to interact properly or that one's not going to negatively affect another. So the interaction, the interdependency of these pieces, they're not considered when we're just putting in place policy or programs. As a result, the pieces don't produce high leverage outcomes that we expect, even if our intentions are good. If we don't focus on the process and how we're putting these things in place, we're not going to get the best outcome that's possible. So the result of this instead is a collection of isolated programs, isolated initiatives, and best practices that potentially function in conflict with one another. They potentially waste resources and minimize positive and desired consequences. So if your current system is successful in operating in isolation, and you have a great program right now, think how much better it could be if it was interconnected to all the parts of the business. Everyone was involved. It's very, very important to step back and think about that. If only your safety department or one or two people are running your safety program, think how much better it could be with the input and influence of everybody else who interacts with or touches it or is affected by it, giving their input and taking away the things that are barriers to high leverage outcomes. So we're going to talk about a couple things. There was a study done, and we're going to look at some of the results from the study, but basically if we lack systems thinking, individuals, groups, we tend to apply what's an oversimplified cause and effect, what we call mental model. And that's just, well, that's the way we do things. I hear that out in the field all the time. This is the way we always do it, or this is just the way that we do it. That thought process, that cause and effect, fails to accurately reflect the system dynamics and the organizational and work complexities. So examples of these efforts and assumptions could be things like improving an accident investigation form to improve investigations, training staff to improve the quality of products, changing a procedure to make a job safer, and modifying a performance measure to improve performance. Each of these are well-intentioned efforts, and they're based on a simple, linear, cause and effect mental model. Solutions are obvious because the problem is evaluated in isolation from all the other associated system elements, the context and the feedback process. And the feedback process is so important, listening to what the people in the field and what the facts tell us. We could be looking at things in feedback and not understanding them or not defining them and not adapting our system to consider these. So here's examples of what we could ask ourselves. How does this change impact other areas? Who else does this change affect? What processes are impacted and how? And what are the potential long-term effects? Does the change improve or hinder the relationships of the system? And does the change produce short-term benefits at the expense of long-term gain? It is crucial that an organization who's seeking to implement a safety management system understand their existing organic management system and understand it truthfully. So this understands how work is completed at all levels. Okay? So we need to look at what we have now and where we want to be and how our system changes affect each piece. So it's important to identify desired consequences for a system, and it's important to understand the current state and gaps. And so we call this a gap analysis. And after a gap analysis has been performed on the current system, we can then define what are the positive consequences that will provide a successful system for the organization. So in other words, what does success look like? What does a safe company look like? What does safety management look like in our organization? How do we know what we've done is good? And I'd submit to you, most people use accident statistics as a measurement. And I don't think that tells the full, complete story. I think those things can be manipulated through good claims management or through other processes. There's so many other things to be measuring. So what does success look like? What are the intended end results? What are we going to measure to determine success? We'll put together a free webinar coming up probably the middle of May, talking about leading and lagging indicators for folks. And that's what we're talking about here. What are we measuring? How will the organization recognize it's been successful? Why is this important? And where will this provide us the most benefit? So we need to look at system gaps and define what success looks like so we can move forward. And we want to look at what's working well, not just what has failed. And so our measurements really need to be focused on that. You know, the failure to include occupational health and safety considerations into our work planning that we do can result in unexpected and undesired disruption to our work process, to our schedule, to our material, to our manpower. So just like there's costs associated with poor quality, there are costs associated with poor safety related decisions. And so it's important that the integration of safety be touch every aspect of our business, touch the 10 core business processes that exist in an organization. So this next bit of information I wanted to share with you comes from a November 2019 safety leadership article, and it talks about focusing on serious incident or fatalities, and could just focusing on that, the reduction of fatalities be a mistake? And this was an article by Don Martin and Don Grover, and they found that there were some common safety maturity barriers to organizations moving forward. And I thought this was appropriate as we talk about transitioning from a safety program to safety management systems and systems thinking, and feedback loops and the dynamics of looking at the whole process. And so the first safety maturity barrier to putting these changes in place focuses on low functioning safety governance. And what does that mean? That means leadership, operational leadership's role in safety in these cases where this was found was passive, and it failed to provide clear direction. I had somebody tell me a story the other day. I thought this was so good because I have folks that I talk to and who mentor me and trying to be a better leader for my company and trying to help get our message across in different ways. And one of the things this person told me was that, number one, I'm the repeater in chief. And so my job is to continue to repeat the message, even if I think I've said it 1,000 times. Every person hasn't heard it 1,000 times. And until I start hearing people saying the things I'm repeating, then I'll know that my message is getting received. And they told me a story about a basketball player for the Celtics. And he was a famous center. And he was told when he joined the team, his coach came to him and said, listen, I don't care how many points you score in a game. That is not what you're going to be measured by. You will be measured by rebounds, and your sole job is to get the rebound. Yeah, Bill Walton, that's it. I couldn't remember his name, that's terrible. But Bill Walton's sole job was to get rebounds and get the ball down court as quickly as possible. And that their coach said, I promise this is what I'm going to measure you by, because this is how we'll be successful. And as most of you hopefully know, the Celtics are legendary in terms of one of the pinnacle successful teams in the NBA. And Bill Walton is, Hall of Fame and an amazing legend by his own rights. And his coach was clear. He was very clear that what most people thought would be the most important thing for a center, scoring points, was not actually, after the coach studied the game and what he needed from each of his players, and he decided that no, the most important thing he could get from his center would be to get rebounds and get the ball down court quickly so his other teammates could score. And he kept his word about how he would judge him and the things he emphasized so he could actually do that one thing that was the most important. And so operational leadership, being passive and not clearly communicating and providing clear direction, can have the same positive or negative impact, right? If we're involved and we're clear in our direction of what we want, whether it's what everybody speculates the rest of industry does or what everyone speculates the company wants, let's be really clear. What do we need from our workforce? The next had to do with low senior leadership accountability. And when you look at the Foundation for Safety Excellence and the key elements that demonstrate successfully across businesses to impact the effectiveness of their program, management leadership and commitment is the first and the top. And so senior leaders with low senior leadership accountability are folks who deflect accepting accountability and tend to talk about site level leaders having primary accountability. And that could sound something like, well, that superintendent just doesn't know what they're doing or isn't doing their job, or that worker, or it's that foreman. Instead of looking and saying, well, I'm the leader over this group, what am I doing about this to lead change and to make sure the culture in my group reflects the things and the values that I think are important. So if senior leadership doesn't know the safety program and they don't know what the goals are and they're not a part of creating that and communicating that repeaters in chief on a regular basis, well, it's no wonder that we have a maturity barrier within our organization. The next were poor monitoring and follow through for key initiatives. Again, clear direction is critical and it has to come from the top. And without that, your safety staff can issue policies and procedures all day long. But if there is no connection to the requirement to create and implement these plans, we'll have a disconnect. We'll have poor follow through. So safety makes a new initiative because we're having accidents in an area. They look at it in a silo, isolated from the rest of the company operations because they don't have involvement and interaction and participation from the rest of management and senior leadership. They come up with an initiative and they issue it out. and it doesn't get traction because it's not something that's being supported. Okay. The next one is no systemic approach to controlling exposure. And a lot of times we find ourselves putting out fires. That's what I call it, chasing injury prevention, or I also call it safety by discovery. What am I going to find today? What am I going to react to today? Instead of identifying and controlling exposures as proactively as we can, and taking and saying what in the process needs to change to prevent this condition from showing up in the field again, and to be able to allow us to change our behaviors. And the last barrier to safety maturity is misaligned priorities. And this is where safety was identified as the #1 priority within an organization. But whenever a conflict came up, whether it was a schedule or a production activity and a conflict with that and safety came up, employees that worked at the interface point reported back and said production consistently won over safety. So if we didn't have fall protection and we're doing a concrete pour at an elevation and the concrete's here, well, guess what? I guess we're gonna pour the concrete and risk our workers in a fall exposure. That's a great example of misaligned priorities, what we say versus what we do, and how we set up our system to support what we say are our priorities. So it's no mistake and it's no surprise, I hope, that the attributes of a successful safety management system mirror the attributes of any other successful business function. And organizations cannot reach high leverage performance even if the effort is put into changing the behavior of the system over time. Without understanding how that system is working, we will get the undesired system and it will further reinforce itself and become the way we've always done things. I'll give you an example. I was out on a job site several months ago and we're consistently having guardrails being built at the wrong dimensions, the wrong spacings, and finally the staff asked me to come out and help because they just couldn't get it straight. And so I didn't start off talking to the workers. I heard the feedback loop. I understood the issue. I actually went to management and to the superintendent and I said, hey, are you familiar with the issue that we're having? He's like, yeah. I don't understand what the problem is. We're building these guardrails. That's what you need. I said, but like every other piece of this project, we have blueprints and we have schematics and we have specifications for how a guardrail has to be written or built, just like any other piece of this project has specifications and drawings and schematics on how we're supposed to put it together. And what came out of our discussion, which was something he wasn't really willing to admit to anybody else and nobody had asked him, was that he had actually never been taught the dimensions of a guardrail. I found this difficult to believe at first, but as we went through the discussions more and more, I realized he worked in an organization that doesn't train their supervision for safety. You became a superintendent because you were good at your trade. And as a trades worker, you got safety meetings here and there, but those were a varying degree of technical and effectiveness. And by the time he got to be a superintendent, he was good at pieces of his job that allowed him to be a superintendent, but he didn't learn other pieces and those got skipped over. It's almost the Peter principle, okay? And so it was simple. I sat down, I showed him the specifications. I said, this is important. If you want to stop having this conflict in the field, if we could train your men and give them a copy of this diagram when they're going to build their guardrails, and I think we can avoid this conflict and move on to, bigger and better things. And it worked. So something as simple as that is, well, this is the way we've always done it. Nobody ever showed me that. We really have to focus on the system and the process instead of the person, right? And in this case, we had an undesired system that was reinforcing itself, and it naturally became the way we've always done things. And changing it from there required us to do some work going back and reestablishing foundations. So I mentioned earlier that the single most important characteristic of safety excellence is management, leadership, and commitment. And so if management is not knowledgeable, involved, accountable, and communicating a positive and proactive safety management system, showing it and seeing it as a value, not just a necessary evil, seeing it as a tool that could help their team be more productive and efficient, doing the job the right way, the safe way the first time, well, then we're neither will anybody else in the organization. If management doesn't see it as a value and understand it, then how on earth does anyone else? I used to run a safety program for a large national contractor, and many years ago, part of my job involved a lot of travel. And so I'd go to all the job sites across the US, here in Hawaii, Micronesia, Alaska, okay? And I would meet with management and meet with our safety staff and the teams, and, you know, back then focused on programs, because that was really my level of understanding and where we're at culturally. And I did see and realize I'd always stop at the office first and meet with the senior manager on site, and I'd ask them how things are going. And I found that I got these really glossed over answers. Oh, they're going well. We're focusing on 0 accidents, you know, all those different elements. And I found that I started asking very specific questions. And I would say, well, what's your safety policy for this project? Or what is your statistics? Or what is your biggest issue? Or have you walked the job with your safety manager? And so as I started asking these things, I'd find that the next time I went out, they'd be able to answer that specific question. And so it became evident to me that we need to equip our management leadership to understand what are the things that they need to do or that they can do that help exhibit commitment and help exhibit participation and understanding and knowledge. And so I think that's so important. If I only had a budget of, you know, a limited budget for my training, I would pour into my management team, because that management team can then turn around and pour into how we do our work and the messages that we send our workers. Now, I find it funny that we send all of our employees to training, but we don't send our foreman, our superintendent, or our PMs as often because, well, they're management. Many of them got there without having this training. And when we have a workforce that has new current information how to do something that's different than our management team has, we're setting ourselves up for conflict. And it's the same concept, whether it's technical information or leadership and commitment. So what are some of the things that managers can do to show commitment, to show leadership? And the first is to communicate a vision. You know, at the beginning of this presentation, I shared our company's vision for 2030 and what we were shooting for to try and achieve. And it's a big, big goal, but that's our vision and that's what drives our decisions. And so what is your vision for your project, for your division, for your company? And how does that that safety, obviously we're talking from a safety perspective, but this vision needs to come from the top. And again, repeater in chief, everybody should know what the vision is and that it came from the boss. And safety expectations and values need to be heard frequently and said with conviction. Think systems management, integrating safety and health into your business, safety management systems, setting yourself up for success, intelligently integrating safety into all parts of the workflow with responsibility at all levels and involvement at all levels. I can say this just from my own personal experience, and I see it all the time out in the field, is if the safety person's the only one day-to-day making efforts to put the safety program in place, and goodness, even if that person is a collateral duty, that means they have another job in the company as well, it's not going to take hold. This is everyone's responsibility and top management's responsibility to take hold and drive it. So how does safety get integrated to all pieces? The safety first philosophy versus safe production or efficiency. I have to be honest, I'm sure some of you may have a slogan in your company or think safety first is a great slogan. I actually can't stand it. And that may surprise you, since I've dedicated, 30 plus years of my life to being a safety professional. I feel like I eat, drink, and sleep safety. But I believe that when we say safety first, while our intentions are good, we're actually showing and speaking that safety is separate from everything else we do. Well, let's have our safety meeting and let's go then talk about the work that we're going to do, instead of let's have our huddle meeting and let's talk about how we're safely going to do our work. It's about integrating safety into all the operations. It's not an optional accessory. It's not something we do when we have time, because we never have time. It's a part of our processes. And so in order for it to be part of our processes, another thing management and leadership can do is define roles and responsibilities. You know, it'd be interesting if you asked yourself, do you know what your role and responsibility is within your safety program right now? And are you fulfilling that? And do the people underneath you or who work with you know their roles and responsibilities? It's the key, it's a basis for us to be able to be involved and know whether we're hitting the mark or not. You know, are we measuring people on their involvement and their participation? Or are we just measuring success based on statistics? Requiring accountability from all employees isn't a negative thing. Accountability just means answerability. This could be good job, well done, you know, excellent results, or this could be, hey, we have had a little practical drift here. This is not what we're supposed to be doing, and let's talk about getting back on track, right? So we also need to allocate resources to support the program or to support the system. And if we don't know, you know, like your training program, for example, resources for that, your, you know, allocating time is a resource. If you expect somebody who has collateral duty to be doing safety, have you really told them how much time you expect them to spend with their other job and responsibilities? And are you really providing them an adequate amount of time to do that job justice? Conducting assessments to support change. That means stepping back and taking a good, clear look at what system you have in place versus what system you actually thought you had. And I used the term practical drift a minute ago, and that's where we start off, you know, on the straight and narrow. Here's our process, here's our procedure, and over time it drifts and it changes. And it's important to be doing those checks and balances to make sure we're doing what we said we would do and what we do works. And if there's a gap or a fix that needs to be made in the system, that as leadership and as management, we recognize that. We listen to the feedback loops of the workers, of our customers, the things that we see ourselves, and we take measures, we take action. And be proactive. Don't wait until somebody gets hurt to say, oh yeah, I knew that that was a problem. We probably should have done something about that before. It's important to be proactive and move quickly. I love this saying, and Dr. Deming is one of my favorite authors and sources for information when I'm kind of studying and trying to put together systems, thoughts, and approaches. And this saying speaks to me a lot, and hopefully it has meaning for you too. And he said that it's funny how we don't have the time to improve, but we have plenty of time to perform work inefficiently and to resolve the same problems over and over. And my goodness, I worked in a company where we started rolling out a stretching program in the early 90s. And in fact, I'm going to be bold and say we definitely were the first in the state, if not a leader within the nation, of doing this. And now a lot of companies stretch, and I think it's great. It's a very good program. But when we were looking at doing this, you know, we had a supervisor come to us and say, you know, I don't have time or money, my project's behind schedule, I have this many people, it's going to cost me this much money for a 5-minute stretch, I can't do it. And I came back to him and I said, oh, I understand the struggle. If I can come out and find 15 minutes of spare time for you, will you stretch? He's like, well, you're not going to find it. So I came out the next day, and basically they didn't start work until 7:15. And I told him, I found your 15 minutes, here you go. And it's funny how he had time to keep doing that ineffectively over and over and over, yet as soon as something safety-wise came up, he absolutely didn't have the time or the resources or the money and wasn't going to commit to it. But yet it's right there in front of him. And if the same commitment exists for safety as that exists for everything else around the project and the processes, we'd be in a much different position. And so how many of us are saying we can't do something, but we really haven't allowed a new truth to step in and look at things with a different perspective and say, well, actually, maybe I can do this differently. And so I love this saying, again, Dr. Deming, a bad system will beat a good person every time. You know, very rarely is it about the person. It is almost always about the system we put that person into. So what was Dr. Deming trying to convey with this quote, right? It's not an attempt to get people to give up trying because failure is certain. Far from it. It's an attempt to get people to understand the importance of the system and the futility of trying to focus on blaming people for failures. Dr. Deming said that we're being destroyed by best efforts. Trying harder to do what you understand is your job when the system is broke often results in more damage. Don't just do something, stand there and think, is what he would say. So if there's a bad system, it will beat a good person every time. What can you do? You've got to focus on not trying harder within the current system, but on changing the system so that success is built into it. Relying on heroic measures is a poor way to manage. We see this in the field with safety all the time. He said that he estimated in his experience, most troubles and most possibilities for improvement added up to proportions, something like 94% belonging to the system and 6% being special. Those unique one-off things. 94% belonging to the system means the responsibility is with management because we implement and manage the system. So the point is that looking to blame people is not a good strategy for improvement. The impact due solely to a person's direct action, not including their interaction with the system and with others, is small in comparison to that of the system within which we work. Deming wanted people to focus on improving the system. So do I. This will achieve better results than searching for what people did wrong. Focus on the process. So again, he's not saying it's the system and there's nothing we can do, just accept it and that's how things are. He wanted us to focus on the most effective improvement strategies. There is huge waste directed at blaming people for bad results. We should focus on improvement in the area of greatest possibility for results. So let's talk about an occupational health and safety management system. It's a cycle. And actually in this diagram, it shows the cycle as being linear. It's actually very dynamic, but we'll just use this for discussion today. And this is our Plan, Do, Check, Act. This is based on the American National Standards Institute Z10 standard for occupational health and safety management systems. I love this standard. We use it in all of our work, and it's a guiding principle for us with regards to system thinking. So plan the work, go out and do the work according to the plan. There's so much more to this, but we'll just give a high level overview here. We'll go out and do the work according to the plan. Check. Are we doing what we said we would do? If we're not, what needs to change? The plan or our actions, and then take that action, okay? And it's a cycle. So this is from National Safety Council, a code of ethics. If you are a member of the National Safety Council, what a great document that they provide for their membership. This has been around for years. It's a great resource. I'll show it to you later again at the end of the publication. I'm trying to give you tools to walk away with. They have a gap analysis that you can conduct in here. They've got an outline of roles and responsibilities within an organization. And they talk a lot about this Plan, Do, Check, Act and this safety management system, but they also share this foundation for safety excellence. And I could probably talk all day about this diagram, but I won't. I'll just key on a couple things. And many of you may have seen the accident pyramid before. This is that pyramid just expanded. So the top portion of the pyramid is consequence, and this is typically the 5 tiers of measurement of failure that we all look at. And these are all after the fact. These are reactive, okay? So something has to go wrong for us to respond, recognize, respond, react. And there are several different studies out there. And I'm just going to use a ratio of 363 incidents, where 363 incidents of loss or consequence occur. You can say that 300 of those will be first aid cases. 60 of those, will be OSHA recordables, meaning that they were above basic medical care. 2 were OSHA DART, days away, restricted time, and lost time, light duty, and 1 was a fatality. And so the concept here is that if we're walking around and the only things that are serious enough that will get our attention and for us to act and react is something that could kill somebody, we're off base in our theory. Any of these incidents, a hazard could result in any varying degree of the results or the consequence that you see on this pyramid. And we don't want to wait until somebody is killed before we recognize the seriousness of our system needing to change. Many of us walk around every day and we see near misses or behaviors that need to change, or property damage or first aid cases. So if we could take that 300 and by our active involvement in our safety management systems, reduce that down to 50 or less, we'll have less of an opportunity to move up in the severity in this pyramid. And there's a relationship between frequency of incidents and severity of incidents. Okay? So if you're thinking, well, we don't have a lot of claims or accidents, look closer. Measure near misses. You know, since 1988 in this state, we've been supposed to be measuring near misses and reporting on those within our organizations and looking for trends. So the small stuff counts. What's easier to fix and react and respond to, a near miss or first aid or property damage or a fatality or even a lost time? So it's important, but if we're only operating in the consequence portion of our program or system, we're running around putting out fires and we're not putting in a system that's effective, and we want to be proactive. And many of you have heard that saying before. So the bottom portion of this pyramid represents proactivity and building a safety culture, which is the way we influence each other's behavior. And so the basis of this is values. It doesn't matter what your religious beliefs are. I believe every person can agree that we don't want people to get hurt and we don't want to see loss. Okay? We would like to be efficient, right? Do the job right, the safe way the first time. So if every member of our organization made decisions based on things like nothing we do is worth getting hurt. Let's stop and reevaluate this for a second. It's not working and going the way we planned. Or safety is a managed process. And that's not just managed by the safety manager, it's managed by everyone. Imagine if your lead person on your crews was as involved in the safety program as your foreman and your superintendent and your project manager and all the way up the chain. If we have the attitude and the belief that every injury could and should have been prevented, you know, a lot of people are out there and they say, oh, that's just construction, it's dangerous, this is just the way it is. Sure, that's the way it is right now because we choose to make it that way. You know, I've worked in organizations and I watch companies every day, and I see some really amazing people out there doing some very effective and innovative, efficient work. And it takes effort. And I see how tight their teams are working together and how well everything gets, you know, communicated and put together, versus some teams out there who think, well, our workers aren't smart enough to do this, or that would be a waste of our resources. And I see drastically different results. If we believe that it's okay to get hurt, then we have some serious soul searching to do. Nobody signed on to their company saying, well, I'll give my right arm literally to be able to work here because that's doing our production and doing our activities more important than the quality of my life. And we don't have to choose between the two. We can put systems in place that support both safe production. Okay? And so the last value is that safety is a shared responsibility. Every single person in your organization, no matter what job they do, has a responsibility in the safety program. And it absolutely starts at the top. Okay? So there's some controls that get built on these values. There's 9 elements of a safety management system, and it's a continuous improvement process. And it's a little bit different. We measure things differently than we would like production on a construction project. Okay? We want to be measuring not just failure of accidents. We want to measure the things that contribute to a successful program. That could be training, key performance indicators. That could be, you know, these are these leading and lagging indicators, right? That could be how many people conducted a good daily huddle and that they talked about safety, going out and making observations for your, you know, most significant trends and the things that as a team you've looked at systemically and saying, what are the things we can do to make a difference? There's a lot of things that we can measure besides just accidents. Okay. So we're talking about this cycle. This is kind of like our Plan, Do, Check, Act, just a little differently. And we'll look at it with regards to the safety management system. This is all functioning around and interacting with, and this is management's leadership and commitment, our assessing and establishing baselines of our operations, developing plans, setting goals, strategies, and then the tactics to put those strategies in place for my military people here. Implementing these strategies and tactics, and then reviewing and adjusting, and it's a constant cycle. So 9 elements of a safety management system. This system is a balanced approach between operational and technical elements, our cultural and behavior elements, and our administrative and management elements. And so some of the administrative and management portions could be management, leadership, and commitment, organizational communications, and system documentation. I think one of the things that makes us different than other safety support service firms is that I actually own part of a communications company, 721. In fact, Nalani is the president of that company. And our messages and our communication tactics, we think about that with our clients. We think about what is the message we want to send internally, what is the message we want to send externally, and is our message sent being the one received? Are we telling people what working safely is going to help them achieve and what working safely is going to help them avoid? And are we breaking down those barriers and myths of the past with how we communicate, right? Repeat, repeat, repeat. How are we documenting what we're doing? Let's capture, we're doing a lot of good things. Let's capture our efforts. Let's evaluate and analyze those, and let's make sure we have good documentation. And assessments. Again, are we doing what we said we would do? Where are our trends? Where are we successful? Let's not just measure failures too, everybody. Let's go out and say, what is working well in our company and why? And once we figure out why, let's figure out how to spread that across areas that aren't working as well and focus on the good and the effective systems that are in place and the successes that we have. It's so easy to get keyed in and focused on just the negative, okay? So doing audits, checks and balances, evaluations, and this continuous improvement thought process and effort that involves everyone. Our operational and technical elements of a safety management system could involve things like hazard recognition. Every person in this organization should be able to recognize a hazard. They don't have to be able to quote line and verse the safety regulation, but they should be able to see it, evaluate it, and understand what needs to be done to control it, right? Just seeing a hazard and pointing it out isn't the end of the game. We've got to be able to know what do we need to do to fix it and help put those things in place to move forward. Does facility design and engineering. Safety by design is a big issue. Looking at when we're establishing new processes or new procedures or new facilities, how does that involve safety and what are the things that can make it better? I was working with a team and the project had been delayed for a while, and we actually took advantage of the delay time and looked at, we had a precast plant that we were using, and we actually went through the whole plant using members of the entire production team, including safety, operations, the craft personnel, walked through the entire process and found areas where there were safety hazards and actually designed fixes into those hazards that were passive fixes, permanent fixes, and some of them were procedural, but if we could fix it with a guardrail or a change in how we did the job, we did it. And what a great time to take advantage of. We were slowed down a little bit and delayed. What a great way to use that delay time to improve our process. After that, that facility had an excellent safety record. And every time we'd go out and look and watch the operations, they were consistently being done safely because the system set the worker up to work safely naturally. And it was great. So this is what we're talking about with facility design and engineering. And then operational safety programs, how we do our business. We're going through this delay time here a little bit too. We've been actually remapping our entire processes for our company and saying where are places where we think we want to do differently or make changes or improvements and putting those improvements in place. And that's not something that only gets done in delay and downtime, but this is a process that should be repeated on a regular basis. What is the system we put people into to work with? And then the last piece of the safety management system is cultural and behavior. And cultural, again, has to do with how we influence each other's actions and behaviors. And so how are we involving our employees? Are we listening to their feedback? Are we involving them in the planning process? Is the employee involvement meaningful? And I think a lot of companies could do better at this. And it's not just about safety committees. In fact, I don't really like safety committees. I like leadership committees and learning teams, and getting a learning team together like Ford did to solve a trend within the organization, and taking people who understand that work and saying, okay, here's our issue. How do we fix this? And evaluating each of those options to say, how does this negatively or positively impact anything else? We don't want to create another problem from fixing one. How do we motivate people? How do we impact their behavior and pivot their behavior to change to positive participation? And how do we impact those attitudes? And I think a lot of that is leadership. Doesn't matter what the subject matter is. We're talking about safety today, but motivation, behavior, and attitude is fully based on leadership and knowledge and communication. So training and orientation is a key element in this aspect. The state of Hawaii says you're supposed to have a training program. And I see a lot of folks out there reacting last minute, oh, I need XYZ class, or not even knowing what people are trained on or capturing the training that they're doing, and making sure that it's effective, it's meaningful, it's relevant, and that it's put into action in the field. So at the end of this course, when you go to our website, to the safety leadership site, and you download the resources, we provided you a lot of things. The article and chapter on Paul O'Neill, there's some good cultural articles here for your reading. We're going to talk about the regulations here as it affects leadership and management in a minute, but the last document we've given you is called the Safety Pivot. And this is really a call to action from this class. And we encourage you to fill this out. It's got the 3 things you've learned or 3 things you're going to do different from this class. When you're done with your pivot, if you email it to us, we'll email it back to you in 30 days to see how you're doing and kind of hold yourself accountable for it. But I challenge you to do that. You know, attending a course for any period of time, you want to get value out of it, and you want to think about, what did I learn? What does this mean to me? And what can I do with this information? And it's a call to action. Okay, this is a call to action. So speaking of action, let's talk about money. Show it to me, right? And so many of you may have heard of the Iceberg Theory. It's been around a long time, and this is really the 2 types of losses that we have and how we measure these losses. And so we have direct and indirect costs associated with insurance, right, and claims. And so our direct costs are how much we pay for our insurance, and the claims costs that we see on a loss run. And we can manipulate those numbers to a certain extent based on our claims management and affecting our reserves. And we can measure them down to the penny, so we kind of know what they are and we can navigate around them, just like if we were a ship traveling along the ocean and we see the tip of this iceberg. But what we can't measure, what's not as easy to see and understand, is what's under the water, what's supporting those direct costs, which are indirect costs. And 70 to 90% of true accident costs are indirect. That means it comes out of our pocket, our profit, our operational costs. And these are things like there was an incident and equipment was damaged, but it's not enough that you're going to make a claim. Even if it was, you have a deductible for that. And so that comes out of your pocket. Things like lost time by an injured worker, fellow worker, or supervisor. And we're not talking about lost time to stay home for indemnification payments or payments for you to stay home, excuse me. Those are direct costs. We're talking about, you know, lost time by everybody who stops an accident happened and responds and reacts and helps clean up the scene and deal with the injured worker, as they should, but that's lost time. Maybe there's spoiled product in this accident, and you know, what kind of impact is that going to be to get replacement product here, and could that impact your schedule or have freight costs and shipping costs associated with it? Or are you even able to get the same product? You know, unhappy customers, and our customers aren't just our clients. Our customers can be internal and external. Internally, they're our employees. Externally, they could be our contractors and vendors who work with us, and it could even be our community. Then cleanup time, schedule delays, liquidated damages. They say that training a new employee to replace somebody who's brand new takes at least 30 days. Many people in our organizations do the job of 2 or 3 people, and to replace them would be even more devastating. We have overhead costs, we have legal fees, and nothing's for free. Just because insurance paid that direct cost, you know, for 3 years, you're gonna carry the burden of that loss, and it's gonna impact your premiums and your costs and your experience modification rate. So what are the ultimate costs? There's a lot of different theories out there. One says that for every $1,000 claim and direct cost, you have another $4,000 cost that came out of your pocket. OSHA has a program called Safety Pays. I'm going to show you this on the next slide, and there's a little article about that in the resources that I've provided for you. It's a great program. It basically can help employers assess the impact of occupational injuries and illnesses on their profitability. And this program uniquely uses a company's profit margin. It takes the average cost of an injury or illness and an incident cost multiplier to project the amount of sales a company would need to cover these costs. So the point of this program is intended to be used as a tool to raise awareness of how injuries and illnesses can impact a company's profitability. It's not really to provide a detailed analysis of one particular company's illness and injury costs, okay? But the average claim costs used in this program are provided by NCCI, the National Council on Compensation Insurance, and the data reflects the average cost of lost time workers' comp insurance claims between the years 2013 and 2015. And so the indirect cost estimates that are provided in this program are taken from the Business Roundtable's publication, Improving Construction Safety Performance. They're based on a study that was conducted by Stanford University's Department of Civil Engineering. And the magnitude of indirect costs is inversely related to the seriousness of the injury. The less serious the injury, the higher the ratio of indirect costs to direct costs. And while they may account for the majority of true costs of an accident, indirect costs are usually uninsured and, like I said before, unrecoverable. It's thought to be 70 to 90%. So it's important to take a look at this, and Safety Pays is a good tool to use that. So just looking at the direct cost ratio from the Safety Pays site, you can see that the inversely proportional ratio is based on the cost of the loss incurred. Another way to look at this is looking at company profit margin and what are the sales required to pay for accidents. So if you had a 5% profit margin versus 3% or 10%, so we use 3% for today. If you had an accident that cost $1,000, that meant at a 3% profit margin, you had to do $33,000 worth of work to pay for that. If an accident cost $10,000, you had to do $333,000 worth of work to pay for that $10,000. And if an accident at 3% cost $100,000, you had to do $3,333,000 worth of work to pay for that. So the question is, what are we working for? And do our supervisors and employees understand the true costs of injuries and the impact to efficiency? That's not so they don't report them, be careful of that. It's so that we work hard to avoid them and to prevent them. There's some other really great studies. There's a Foster Wheeler study out there that shows proportionally the direct relationship between productivity and reduced accident rates as well. And so if you're interested, there are some great additional resources available if you want more information on the relationship between productivity and safety. National Safety Council has a Journey to Excellence publication. You can just Google that and pull it up. It's for executives and managers to study and understand the relationship between productivity and the cost of accidents too. All right, so let's talk about the cost of wasted time. This is another important discussion because money is found in several different forms. Cost is found in several different forms, and I often have people say, I don't have time for that. That costs me too much money. I'm behind schedule, so on and so forth. And so This chart actually came from a great resource from Norsky Veritas, and it was actually on a publication about cleanliness and orderliness. And the chart actually went through and gave the cost of wasted time in cents per minute, dollars per hour, daily and annual costs. And this was based on working 260 work days per year. And so, I took this and I actually first used this when I was talking to that supervisor I told you about earlier who said they didn't have time to stretch. And I came out and found 15 minutes for them to stretch because they hadn't started work at 7 like they were supposed to. They started at about 7:15 by the time everybody got up and was ready to do their job. And they were insisting they couldn't stretch for 5 minutes in the morning because they're behind schedule. So I use this to also talk about, well, how much time does that cost us when we sit around and waste that? And with safety, we're getting good value from this. We're having a proactive discussion in the morning, we're huddling, we're identifying injuries, we're identifying work readiness, and we're talking about safety and the activities that we have to do for the day. So if you just look and say a yearly income, and this is non-burdened by the way, but let's say somebody makes $75,000 a year, that's 60 cents for every minute they lose, $36 for every hour, about $9,300 for one lost hour daily for a year, $4,800 for one lost minute daily for 30 years, and $281,000 for one lost hour daily for 30 years. And I thought about this a lot, and then I wondered how much it cost me to think about this. But, if we could take with safety and improve our efficiencies by integrating doing the job the right way the first time and people not getting hurt, what type of impact does that have on our time? And then I thought about what are all the things on the job that actually waste our time, our energy, and our materials, and it really pointed back to disorder. That's one of the reasons why if I'm out walking a job site or a workplace and I see a lot of cleanliness and orderliness issues, I know consistently that is an indicator that there are more things going on at that project than just safety issues, okay? It's an organizational leadership issue. So if I had $9,300 per employee a year, or I would even take $4,600 per employee a year for a safety training budget, and I could use that budget to train them, to participate in pre-planning activities, that would be substantial. And if I could take that and improve efficiencies from that, well, that would be a great return on investment, wouldn't it? I was reading this Quality Progress Journal and an article that William Conway wrote, and he said that the sum of waste from materials, people's time, and lost sales often amounts to as much as 20 to 50% of net sales. I thought, that's substantial. That means in a company with sales of $100 million, the waste can be $20 to $50 million, and I just thought about that in my own company and in the organizations that I work with, and I thought, it's about management leadership. It's about being organized. It's about our systems that we put in place, and it's about integrating safety into every aspect of the business to avoid loss, to prevent what I call safety rework or safety shutdowns, because people don't have the same level of knowledge or understanding or expectation and understanding of their roles and responsibilities. Okay? So it's interesting. I often have people tell me how they see things, and I often ask back, are you sure that the way you see things is in agreement and in alignment with how the law sees it? And so let's just talk about a couple things as we head into the last stretch of our class here. So I had somebody give me this slide one day when we were having a conversation, and I was like, hey, what are you trying to tell me? And they was like, well, there's what you know. There's what you know you don't know. But the bigger piece of the pie is what you don't know you don't know. What the heck does that mean? We have to get out there. We have to look and be sure. We can't make assumptions. I had the word assume broken down for me at an early age. And if you spell out the word assume, it means to assume makes an ass out of you and me. And I find it ironic that the word's meaning and its spelling are so in line. And so we can't assume. We need to know what the law says. We need to know what the expectations are. We need to know how our behavior and our thoughts and our philosophies line up with these regulatory requirements, because we want to do a good safety management system because it's efficient and it's the right things for human capital sustainability. And we want our companies and our people to be successful and to thrive. But we do have to remember that we have laws and regulations that are the minimum requirements. They are the baseline standard for our companies to operate. And God forbid something go wrong, we could be held responsible for what we are and are not doing within them. And so we need to know what they say. And I find it interesting that a lot of managers that I get an opportunity to speak with have never even read the general requirements, even in the state of Hawaii occupational safety and health regulations. And so on our safety leadership page, we've given you a link to each of these. The general industry and the construction in this area are the same. And 12-110 is construction and 12-60 is general industry, just for baseline. So let's look at a couple of these things in the general requirements that talk about management and leadership and what our organizations are responsible for. So the first is a safety and health program, and it's always important to read scope and application. This is telling us who it applies to and how it applies. And so this says that this standard shall, that means it must, apply to all employers with employees doing business in the state, okay? So every employer shall comply with the state laws about a safe place of employment and practices. And I wish I could have you highlight this. You can go back and do this or make a note. It says, we shall do everything reasonable and necessary to protect the life, safety, and health of our employees. Everything reasonable and necessary. So think about that for a second and think about the decisions you're making, the systems that you have in place, and the decision your supervisors are making on your behalf. Because the law doesn't see a supervisor as a separate entity. The law sees the supervisor making decisions by proxy on behalf of the company, on behalf of the employer. So if you are in leadership and supervisory and management, you are the employer. So you shall do everything reasonable and necessary to protect your employees. This piece is kind of long. We see it two places in the general requirements. This is called the hierarchy of controls. With all this COVID-19, many of you may have heard this concept hierarchy of controls or engineering controls come into play a few times. But basically, we don't get to decide just what controls we put in place based on what we like and what we've seen other people do all the time. There's actually a process we're supposed to follow. And the first process talks about eliminating risk, talks about mitigating and protecting against it. And so many of you may have heard somebody say, well, personal protective equipment is your last choice. This is where this comes from. And so we'll look at it on a chart that's a little bit easier to decipher for you. These hierarchy of controls, every time we have a risk in the field, this is what the process you go through to determine what is or what are the combination of controls you're going to put in place to minimize that risk to the lowest level possible if you cannot eliminate it. So the first thing is asking yourself, can I eliminate the hazard? Can I get rid of this? If you can't get rid of it, you ask yourself, will this substitution apply? Is this something dealing with a chemical, speed or force or amperage or pressure or noise that I can substitute something else out for a lesser degree of hazard? So maybe I have a chemical I'm going to use and I substitute a less harmful chemical for that. Okay. Engineering controls. These may be things where we add ventilation or we have interlocks like you do on your washing machine. If it's running and you open up the door, everything stops, okay? Circuit breakers or machine guards. I may have warnings where I have signs or alarms or labels. I go down next to my next option, which are administrative controls. I actually see 4, 5, and 6 being put in place much more frequently than 1, 2, and 3. And that's because it's easy or easier and it's more common. And we really need to be looking at all of these in order to reduce the hazards to the lowest level possible. So administrative controls are procedures. This could be a safe job procedure like a hazard analysis. This could be changing work schedules, equipment inspections, and training, right? And then the last option is personal protective equipment. And that's kind of self-explanatory in terms of maybe it's safety glasses or gloves or fall protection equipment. See people tying off way before they should be tying off. when there are other things that could be done to eliminate or control the hazards. Okay, so same thing, this hierarchy of controls is what we use by law in order to mitigate or eliminate hazards. Okay, the next area in the general requirements that has to do with management is under the requirement to have a written safety and health program. There are 12 key elements that our program is to contain here in the state of Hawaii. And several of these talk specifically about management. And so item number 3 in your safety program, it says that you are to provide for visible top management leadership in implementing the program and ensure that all workers at the site, including contract workers, are provided equally high safety and health protection so that all will understand that management's commitment to safety is serious, okay? The next talks about in 5 and 6 to assign and communicate responsibilities for all aspects of the safety program and loss prevention program to, no mistake by this order, managers, supervisors, and employees. Again, so all will know and understand what's expected of them in the implementation of the program. And then 6 talks about provide a system to hold managers, supervisors, and employees accountable for their responsibilities in the program. And what we actually see happening more often than not, there's some companies that do a great job with management and supervision being involved and being accountable and communicating in the safety program, but more often than not, we see the focus is on employees. And if we're only focusing on the employees and the management isn't in sync and in line with what's supposed to take place, they're gonna hit a glass ceiling pretty quick. And now we create a barrier because things will start to happen like mental models like this. Look, I don't care what you learned in that safety class or what the safety person told you. I'm your boss, and if you want to keep working here, this is how we do things. And some of that's because that's what the supervisor believes. They don't know what the policies are, or they don't understand the culture and haven't been brought in line with it, and they feel challenged or offended, right? So we get employees excited. They want to go out and apply what they're learning in a class, but because their manager or supervisor hasn't sat through the same class and isn't ready to reinforce what they just learned as a part of this is how we do our job, when we send them out into the field, there's an immediate conflict, which creates a barrier, and now there is no trust. And where trust is gone, we will not see the employees trying any longer to work safely, or eventually those employees will leave, and that's a shame. Next fall under, again, the safety requirements, and it says that the employer shall ensure that practices are understood by all employees and are underscored through training, positive reinforcement, correction of unsafe performance, and if necessary, clearly defined and communicated disciplinary system. So who is the employer? Management and supervisors, okay? Safety and health training in the general requirements, there's 3 key paragraphs, and 2 of these talk about management and supervision. The first says that the employer has to develop and institute a safety and health training program. That means you are doing a needs assessment, you're looking at the different types of work that gets done, you're looking at the different regulations and training requirements and tools and manufacturer's requirements for proper and safe operation. And you are putting together a schedule of, here's all the safety things that need to be talked about in the safety meeting. Here's all the training that needs to be done for an authorized user or a competent person level. You have a schedule, you know who's trained in what, and you are rotating people through on a regular basis, whether it's the retraining period required by law or that's recommended. And you have a system that you know you are equipping people with the knowledge that they need to put your program in place and to comply with the law. So the next one talks about supervisors and managers shall be trained in the elements of the employer safety program and the specific responsibilities assigned to them under the program. The next section talks about the employer shall ensure supervisors and managers understand their responsibilities and their importance in the workplace. And training for managers needs to enable them to recognize hazards, maintain protections, and reinforce training, okay? So really important involvement. I hope most people know this, but this is called the rules of construction. And this is in federal law, this is in the state law, and it's in many contracts as well. If you're called a controlling contractor in your contract, that's what this is talking about, okay? We have the multi-employer worksite policy, citation policy that exists that talks about this too. But if you're a prime contractor, when you contract for the full performance of a contract, you assume all obligations prescribed as employer responsibilities by law, whether or not any part of the work is subcontracted. So that means that there is no contractual risk transfer in safety. It is a non-delegable duty of the employer, and it is a non-delegable duty of the prime contractor. You, whoever you hire and bring in to work for you as a sub, they are responsible for their own employees on that project as a sub, and you are responsible for everyone, including the sub's employees. So that means we need to manage our program and our processes. Another unique element that we see in the law here in the state of Hawaii, I see this in court cases I work on all the time, is that any employee who has knowledge of the existence of anything unsafe, I'm going to paraphrase this paragraph here, shall promptly report it to the supervisor or person in charge. And a supervisor who receives that notice shall take immediate steps to correct the unsafe condition or practice. That's by law. That word immediate is unique. You know, usually we see in a timely manner, but in this case, it means immediate. You must do something, whether it's temporary or a permanent fix. And trust me, this has shown up in almost every court case I have worked on in the past 20 years. Okay. The next is our requirement to conduct inspections, and these shall be conducted. This paragraph actually changed in 2012, and I see a lot of citations being written on this aspect. And it says that inspections shall be conducted with sufficient quality and frequency and scope in order to identify hazards and put their corrections in order, okay? If you have 1 to 99 persons on your project at any single moment in the workday, and take note of that, any single moment in the workday, you're to have an employee assigned to make at least 1 inspection per day. The rest of this paragraph goes on to talk about how that needs to be documented in writing and what that information needs to entail, okay? And the last piece here to me is the catch-all for the competent person phrase, okay? And we know that there are several subjects that require competent person supervision. We actually have a free webinar coming up. We've run it a couple times already with good success on the role of the authorized, competent, and qualified persons, and what the law expects and intends the competent person to be, and what we see in practice in some cases are not in alignment. And so whether or not there's a specific rule that says you need competent person supervision, we have this general requirement here, and this is just a requirement for competence. And it says when work's to be performed under the supervision of a designated person, that person shall have the degree of competence necessary to perform or direct the work in a safe manner. And so that's key. And I'm not an attorney, but I think it's interesting if you're you know, so inclined, you could look up the term negligent hiring and negligent retention, because we're keeping supervision in many cases that we're not changing and re-equipping them with knowledge. We're retaining them when they're behaving in a negligent manner, and that could be consequences for our company. And we're hiring people who aren't properly equipped, and we're not equipping them to be running work. And this means that we've got to be training them, we've got to be leading and managing them, so that they can do their job with competency to avoid people from getting hurt. Okay. So the goal is, you know, we don't want to find ourselves in this situation where we didn't know what the law said, we didn't think about our safety systems, we didn't think and understand that as managers and supervisors, it involved us at all. That was the safety person's job. We really need to focus on, you know, how can we avoid this from happening? We don't want people to get hurt. We don't want people to get killed. We don't want our businesses to be destroyed. And, you know, really, I had a case several years ago where a worker fell through a roof, and the estimating team put a good safety plan in place. We have estimating safety coming up too, by the way, in a couple weeks. They went out and bid this job, needed a new roof put on it, identified that there were fall hazards to fall through the roof, put in costs and dollars for fall protection equipment. The company put the equipment up in place, workers were trained, and a supervisor got put in charge of this project. And one of the workers came back from a vacation. It was on a double roof in the middle valley of the roof. They're walking around, and the worker said, hey, you know, do I really need to tie off? Nobody can see me from here. I'm not going to fall off the building. And the supervisor said, okay. He didn't need to wear his fall protection. And later on that day, the worker fell through the roof 14 feet and landed on his head and shoulders and survived. And it was, you know, amazingly, he lived. And today he can say 2- and 3-word sentences and walk with some assistance, okay? But he'll never be the same. And that day when this happened, 2 lives were destroyed. That supervisor who said, yes, okay, it impacted the entire company and anyone associated with it. This is a small company and they were very tight. But it also impacted, obviously, the worker who asked and then participated in not being tied off. And this was one of the, it's actually the only case and the first time in my career here in Hawaii that a supervisor was personally sued over a worksite incident because of his involvement in it. And I'll tell you, it did not turn out well for him. He lost. He couldn't afford an attorney because he didn't have a job. He represented himself. And it was sad. 2 lives and livelihoods were destroyed because of the system not being properly put in place and people not having competency overseeing the system and participating within it. And so I just want to share that I don't ever want to see this happen again. And I'm sharing it with you so that you can be aware of these things do happen here. We don't hear about them that often. And on one hand, that's sad because we need to know about it so we can learn from it. So even if you're on the right track, you're going to get run over if you just sit there. So what are you going to do with what we talked about today? We had a lot of discussion about, oops, I'm so sorry. We had a lot of discussion about leadership's effects on safety culture. We had a lot of discussion about systems thinking, human capital sustainability, and understanding what our current processes are and our current systems are, and what are the things that need to be done to change. So I mentioned a great resource earlier. This is the National Safety Council's Code of Ethics. It's a resource guide, and it's funny that a safety document's called the Code of Ethics because that's actually what it's about, is ethics. And this book contains 4 essential characteristics to safety success and safety excellence. It's a step-by-step plan to help a company either check where you're at or get something put in place. It has some measurements for safety performance. It's got a good gap analysis and some analytical tools in there. And so if you belong to National Safety Council, I encourage you to check that out and use that as a resource. Again, we have open enrollment webinars. We do custom classes, and we have a lot of free classes coming up too. So I encourage you to take advantage of that and check out our website. We're actually putting a whole new learning management system in place that we hope will be up and running here within the next month to 2 months at the latest. That'll be a hybrid between live discussions like this or in our virtual meetings and some online coursework in addition to our in-person training that we do and our custom classes we do. And I mentioned, you know, if you want to stay engaged and stay informed, you can sign up for our e-club. But I want to take an opportunity now. We've got about, you know, a little bit more, maybe 17 minutes left in the presentation, but I'd like to see if there's any questions. What questions do you have for me about what we've talked about so far?